it's Jeff Chalmers here from Discover Double Bass, where we go and interview some of the double bass world's most exciting artists, people who really have an impact with their music and are, changing the way that the double bass is played. If you're a fan of our instrument, please go and check out the website discoverdouble-bass.com. We have lessons and courses to help you on your journey. And today's guest is somebody who I had the great privilege of seeing twice at two consecutive International Society of Bassists Convention, where they really stole the show with their incredible solo recital, and they play some, really fantastic music. One of the more recent things that I've seen is their participation in Deep Tones for Peace, which is an incredible online project that we'll speak about soon. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome to Discover Double Bass, Jiri Slavik. So welcome, it's just fantastic to meet you in person.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for the invitation, and it's great to be here.
Well, do you remember the first ISB convention that you played at and the recital that you played? I was just saying how much it moved me, and it's interesting to me. Like, what was your experience?
Well, the first convention that you saw me was not my first convention that I played. There was, I think, in 2009, the first time I went to the US, and that I remember very vividly. Mark Dresser, the great bass player and a friend, invited me then, and since that moment I have been more or less kind of regular visitor. But when you saw me in 2015 in Colorado, in Fort Collins, I believe it was.
Yes.
That was the first time I actually brought a bass of mine to the concert, because every time before then I was just using an instrument that was there, and at that point I had fairly recently been transmitted this wonderful 5-string bass from Barre Phillips, also a great mentor of mine, and I would say a family member by now, a grandfather in a way. And I really wasn't yet so comfortable with that instrument back then.
And
so
it's with a high C as well.
Yeah, it's when you start to play a 5-string instrument, I think it really takes some time before you really play 5 strings and not 4 strings plus 1. And that's really how I was playing then, and it took a few years before I could kind of feel that the 5th string is not a surprise there to me, Yeah.
And then you came back for the following convention, and you were.
I missed one in 2017 because my first son was born, and I had other things to worry about than playing the bass for some time. But then I came back in 2019, and that was in Bloomington. And you saw me there.
That was really incredible. I remember you doing a version of Autumn Leaves that starts with this, it just takes you on this crazy journey, and then you suddenly realise that you're taking us into this familiar piece that we all know so well, but I've never heard it played in that way. And I'll provide a link below so people can watch that, because it's actually on YouTube. I think they filmed it.
Yeah.
And it was, for me, it was a really cool experience. And you were back with the same 5-string at the time?
That's true. Yeah, I was. And again, it crashed on the plane, so then it got really quickly repaired before the concert. But luckily, it was in great shape. But with Autumn Leaves, it's funny. People really think that they know the song, and so did I. But then I realized that there's actually an intro to the song, which actually gets completely left out.
Yeah.
And you listen to the first version of Yves Montand, the famous French singer, and he even recites it. He doesn't even sing it.
Were you playing
through
the changes?
I played that intro,
I didn't realize.
Yeah. I played a very improvised kind of an intro, but leading to the intro of the song. And which I think is great, and it's a shame that it's kind of commonly left out.
Yeah, there are these introductions of pieces I remember Love Is a Many Splendid Thing, and all sorts of ones that just occasionally I've bothered to.
Sure.
Taking the time. There's so much rich music there, and sometimes they're really important.
Lost in translation, somehow.
But it's interesting. Maybe it's part of the way that it was so effective is that you're merging from your own interpretation, something quite loose, and it takes on more form. And I think it was the fact that I just was so engrossed in the performance, and then I suddenly realised I was listening to Autumn Leaves. I'm thinking, this isn't where I thought I was. I thought I was at a different place. But I mean, okay, so you were there at the invitation of. Renowned bass player Mark Dresser, and I wondered if we could just jump in and talk a little bit about your relationship with him and the time that I believe that you studied with him.
No, I didn't. No, well, I went to one. I met him at this workshop organized by another great friend and a great bass player and an important person in my life, Peter Herbert, Austrian bass player who also lived a long time in New York and Paris. I met him in Paris, and he invited me to this workshop called Gyms. It doesn't exist anymore nowadays, but Mark was the tutor there. And of course I was aware of Mark, I knew his records and I wanted to meet him, so that was great. And somehow we really clicked already on that workshop. I gave him some music of mine that I recently recorded, if he could listen to it. And then afterwards he did, and based on that he invited me to that first convention where he was doing this so-called New Music Summit.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, great to be part of that, because of course there were many other great, exciting players that I could meet in person for the first time.
So for those of us who are less in the new music, in more contemporary world, like who are some of the key players? You mentioned then obviously Mark Dresser, Peter Herbert.
Yeah.
Who are some of the other players that come to mind that you feel that people should be checking out?
Well, of course, Barre Phillips, you know, that's where it starts to me, and you know, that's the first time I kind of heard someone playing just bass unaccompanied. I mean, he was even the first one to make an album like that in history, right?
Really?
Yeah.
Before Dave Holland's?
I think it was before, yeah. And Dave Holland and Barre played a famous duo recording on ECM.
Yes.
Music for two basses. So it's all kind of in there. And of course, Dave Holland was someone that I also was able to meet on those conventions, and then, you know.
Wow.
And with Dave Holland, I have a very special memory of him coming to the Royal Academy of Music where I was studying for a workshop, and at the end of it he played 3 songs, you know, just on his own at a concert, and that was really the first time I heard music, or, you know, standards being played on the bass and sounding so complete. I wasn't missing anything. I wasn't missing rhythm section or piano. And I went then to him and said, thank you, we are all going to practice now. But the truth was I went to a pub straight away and down 2 pints. Felt really humbled by what I just see.
That's the thing. It's that crazy journey, isn't it? And those moments where I mean, honestly, for me, watching you play was the main thing that I can remember from that recital, the first time, because I knew nothing about your music. I just walked into the recital room and I saw, you know, oh, there's this interesting guy, let's go and check out and experience his music. And it was so interesting. And bring us back to Barre Phillips. I think he's a bass player who feels like he's made such an important contribution to the world of double bass. And I feel like we should be hearing about him more. He's someone I'd love to meet. And can you talk about your relationship with him?
Right. Well, I met Barre. Also, Mark Dresser is involved in that because he told Barre that, you know, there's this guy living in Paris, and, you know, he'll be getting in touch with you maybe, and you should meet up. And then we met at the European Bass Convention in Berlin. That was probably 2010, I think, for the first time. And somehow, you know, there was this harmony that kind of came out of that. And a few years later, Barre organized this thing called, you know, we called it the bass camp, and basically invited 4 young bass players to his house. I was one of them, Clayton Thomas, Seb Gramss, and John Eckhardt. And we even, you know, we just hanged out. It was really like a meeting, but at the last day, he had a sound engineer, Nicolas Bayard from La Buisson, this amazing studio where, you know, he has recorded for ECM, to come and just record us play.
Oh, wow.
And a recording came out of it called Crossbows, Barre Phillips Crossbows. It's like us, you know, playing improvised, you know, quintets, duets, trios, even some solos. And from then onwards, like, you know, we had this relationship which was even outside of the bass. I was seeing him when he came to play in Paris. You know, sometimes I went to his house just, you know, to visit for a holiday. We really got along with his late wife too, Mary. And then at some point he realized that his bass that he was playing, the 5-string, was somehow too big and heavy for him to move. So he wanted to transmit it to somebody, and I became the very lucky one who has it now, you know. So in that sense, the relation, I guess, is as deep as you could you could imagine having.
And you still have the bass?
Sure, yeah. I don't have it here with me. We are in London now, and you know, it's in Prague, but I play it there, and you know.
I wondered when you said that you were in London, I wasn't sure, because I knew that you'd be using a different instrument. I didn't know whether you were so in the 5-string with a high C world that you would. How do you feel moving between the two things now? Is it?
Well, I think that 5C and high C and 5-string is really a solo instrument for solo discipline, but you can't live out of that, right? You got to be a bass player, so the 4th-string thing is always going to be there. You have to be able to come back to it, and there are instruments that with 4 strings they have also different kind of richness than the 5-string that I have, which is like the fastest bass. It resonates very quickly, and it's completely comfortable with the high frequencies and high notes and chords, but it does not necessarily have this kind of full sub bottom that this instrument, for instance, and it's really made to give you just
this is a beautiful bass.
And this instrument belongs to my dear friend, colleague, and someone who has also had a major influence on me, even though people don't really always know him as a bass player, and that's Fred Thomas, in whose house we are right now.
We're very lucky to be here. And Fred is a composer.
Where Fred is a multi-instrumentalist, mainly a pianist, but he can play, in my opinion, to the same level. Lots of other instruments, drums, bass. Lately has been playing the viol and banjo and so on and so forth. And to me, that was a huge influence when I met him. We were classmates because, at some point in my life, I was really trying to be as best of a bass player as I could be technically.
Yeah.
And then, I saw Fred playing, and he could play maybe, not all those technical things that I thought were so important. But he was playing in many bands, and I wasn't really. So I thought, what's wrong? What am I not doing right here? And then you realize that, when you want to really be useful as a bass player, often doing less is more, because you create space for the other people to talk. You are there to support the conversation, but not necessarily be the protagonist of it, and that takes work, on your own ego, and also then on the playing, and so it was a great kind of journey, from playing all the time up here, lots of notes, gradually moving there, appreciating those frequencies that are there, and just let the notes ring, let the notes sit, and observe what grows out of them.
Yeah. Can we talk about improvisation a bit, because I was sort of reintroduced to your music, or you came up online in the course of the pandemic with this incredible piece. May it all be okay?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Man, it's just so moving. So that is part of this project, which is William Parker, Deep Tones for Peace.
Deep Tones for Peace, yeah.
Which is, who is it that organises it?
Mark Dresser.
Thank you. It was Mark Dresser, and
Mark is the main, and Barre was involved in it too. There is also their, right hand, a lady called Fumiko, who's really in charge of everything, and I have to mention her, because no Fumiko, and I don't think there would be any Deep Tones for Peace. But I originally, have this piece I play with my other band, where I don't really play double bass, but Deep Tones for Peace asked me to do something, and during the COVID era, and with that topic, Deep Tones for Peace, that was the song that I thought I should play that, so it somehow worked out, and tried to play on the bass, and that's the version that
There's something about that which I think there's this clarity with the 5-string as well. In the low end, you've got this kind of, in the lower register, you've got these really kind of there's a focused sound to it in the low mids, which is really kind of clear. You hear the lines moving, and the sort of counterpoint that you create with and the kind of line has a tension, and then resolution onto the G, and it introduces the tension and comes back, and it just, I think it's a beautiful example of developing a piece, and I'll obviously provide a link, because you recorded it beautifully for Deep Tones for Peace, and that's a project that everybody needs to follow, because they're doing incredible things, putting out great energy into the world, and there are artists such as Scott Coley, Rufus Reid, I mean numerous incredible players who are contributing to it. But yeah, in terms of like the improvising on the bass, maybe you could speak a little bit about how that is for you. I mean, in terms of like creating these multi-layered sounds, is there how's that journey been
Right.
are you arranging standards at the beginning? Are you just thinking
Well,
completely free? How's
that's again, derived from the fact that I have not really always been thinking as a bass player only, but I've been, playing with other instruments and listening to other instrumentalists, and you kind of always envy the possibilities that all the other instruments have that you don't really have on the bass. And harmony is something that we deal with a lot, but playing four note voicing simultaneously on the bass is very limited. There's only a few things that we can do in that aspect, and a pianist can play even 10 notes and move them around. And so I've tried to somehow emulate that, to the degree how I could. I lived with also a very great classical guitarist in my first year of college, called Stanislav Harchilkov, and he's still a very technical virtuoso, and he introduced me to this concept of artificial harmonics on the guitar, where you actually don't move your left hand so much, and you are able to cover much more range, so to demonstrate, right, this is we all know the natural harmonics, they're there, but now if we press a note, that whole kind of color changes, and so and I can have that range without going always like really shifting. That's awkward, and it's never gonna sound flowing and natural, and so on, and that suddenly was like, okay, I see. So maybe I could now play a melody and an accompaniment at the same time, just like Bobby McFerrin sings, and he goes from the lower voice to really high note and back again, and so when you listen to him, you are again not missing anything. You have the whole music in one line, and of course that is something that our dear, God of music, as we say, Johann Sebastian Bach thought a lot about too. So when you play his music, you find those implied polyphonic lines, but within a single, single melodic line, and you wonder like how does he do that? So that kind of.
Is Czech music part of your background? I mean, in terms of like when you were growing up, I'm just thinking of like folk melodies and
Hugely, that's what I started on. I was lucky enough to play in my father's band, and my father started this traditional group together with my mom. And I was like 5 or 6 when I started to play there on violin, and I wasn't really exposed to jazz or classical music until much later. So traditional music, especially from that region, is really something that I have still like a physical reaction to. It's like when you have a smell that reminds you of your childhood. I mean, it cannot be anything. It's that one particular thing, and it does something to you. So of course, often with traditional music, when you have it just like this for granted at an early age and you don't even know the value, there's a period when you leave it aside. You are kind of not so happy about being associated with it because you think there are so many other greater, more cooler things to do than wearing a traditional costumes and singing some songs about very banal things like love or loss of money, whatever. But then I found my way back into it also because I lived for quite a considerable time without any break abroad. I lived in Italy, here in London, and then in Paris. And in every of those countries I tried to learn the culture and the language, but I could never get as close to speaking the local dialect and being really someone from that area. That's just not something that you can easily do in like even 10 years. It's really a lifetime. And I re-met a friend from my childhood who also plays the bass, but he's a great maker of traditional instruments called Marian Friedl. And I suddenly heard him play this traditional music from my region, but in like a new creative way. He was writing his own songs, and it seemed so fresh to me and complete, and so that put me again on track. And eventually that led me even to move back to Czech Republic, because I really wanted to explore that music and do something with it. And then of course it also came onto the bass. And it's really interesting because with Marian we often play in duos, and he has this so-called end flute, which is actually the most primitive instrument that has ever been made, right? It's one of the first instruments that we have found in the culture of man, you know, like tens of thousands years ago. And we play, you know, with the 5-string bass, which to me is like the opposite, you know, it's the pinnacle of sophistication of, you know, wooden instrument, and the two of them just like naturally merge together, you know. And I'm really trying to get those sounds of the flute, you know, on the bass somehow assimilated to that. So it's really funny. But when you get wood meeting wood, you know, there's always
and the voice as well in these traditional melodies. You obviously sing as well. And when I was at the convention, did you actually play a Czech folk piece?
In 2019 as an encore, I played one. Yeah. And I know I played more than one. I played a few. But you know, in traditional music, if you don't sing, you are not doing the right thing. You have to sing. That's it. Musician plays and sings.
Yes.
And it's not about technique. It's really about expression. And that thing I find really key to my approach in music in general. A voice is crucial, you know. My first bass teacher, who sadly also passed away, Massimo Giorgi in Rome, he was as a kid a singer in the Sistine Chapel, you know, choir. And then, you know, he would teach me how to play Bottesini and so on, but he would often sing those lines. And, you know, of course, being Italian, you know, bel canto and all that, it's really present. But it was just connected. And then he would play the bass, and I would see how close that actually he's trying to play it as he sings it. And so, of course, singing is really difficult for everyone psychologically, especially when you are adult and you haven't done it. You just think, I'm a bad singer, I shouldn't do it.
It's me.
Perhaps, yeah. But it's also a lot linked with the culture that we live at, you know. In some nations, even if you sing bad, who cares, you know, you just sing, do it, you know. And I have this motto in my life that I took from Samuel Beckett, you know, a lovely quote, says, ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail again, fail better. So
that's great. Well, listen, I think that's a really wonderful moment maybe for us to kind of wrap up the conversation. And I just wondered, where can people find you? Because you're one of these players that, like, I feel like getting hold of you. It's, you know, like, where can people go and experience your music? What projects have you got coming up?
Right.
You know.
Thank you. Well, I'm not exactly the most active social media guy, you know.
Yeah.
That's also because of, I mean, I'm a father now, and, you know, I have a limited amount of time for all these activities, and the social media just can suck time out of you, I find. And so I'm not really there so much, but yeah, after COVID, I'm mostly playing in the Czech Republic, not much abroad. Maybe, you know, the touring might start again, so I guess people could see me there. But of course, there's some music of mine on Spotify. I have a new band, but I don't play double bass in there, so it's called The Survivors, and it's really a fun band where we are also more fathers with little kids, so we think of it as some kind of a playground and instruments as being toys, and yeah, so on and so forth.
That's fantastic. Well, listen, I think we're going to wrap up the conversation here. I'll provide links to everything so people can go and find out about you below. And hopefully we might be able to, if we have time, maybe do a little bit of recording. We maybe hear you play at the end of this video. It'd be wonderful. So just thank you so much on behalf of you know, the audience and myself. Coming to meet you has been a real pleasure. And of course, thank you to Fred Thomas for allowing us to film in his personal studio and use this beautiful bass that we're about to hear now. So, Jiri, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Cheers.
And maybe I play one piece then.
Sounds perfect.
Since we are at Fred's place and with this bass, Fred and I used to play a lot of spirituals together. We were really inspired by the duo of Charlie Hayden and Hank Jones.
Really?
You know, those recordings. And so I thought I would play one spiritual
Fantastic.
called Deep River, you know, a very famous one.